The nonprofit MBA purpose is to provide new business insights and fresh creative ideas for executive directors and their teams that will help them improve their organization. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik. I will be your host for today's Nonprofit MBA podcast, as I have been for 7 years now. I'm re-energized because I just got back from a vacation with my kids in Costa Rica, which was amazing. What an incredible country. I tell you, people there, which is considered to be one of the happiest nations in the world, they are just so delightful and happy, and it's nice to be around people who are that way. And what a beautiful country, just amazing. 97% of their energy comes from renewable resources. They really care about the environment. It's just a great place. I'd highly recommend it. And for those of you who don't know me, I am also co-founder of Financing Solutions, and Financing Solutions for the last 14 years has been the leading provider of lines of credit for small nonprofits in the United States. And, this line of credit product is very valuable to nonprofits. If you think you're unique to having ups and downs in cash flow, you're not. It's very typical. So if you're interested in learning more about a line of credit for your nonprofit, please visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. Today, I am very excited to be speaking with Patricia Schwartz. And Patricia Rachel Schwartz, MA, MCC, MBC, HWC, is an executive coach and major gifts coach. She has over 40 years of experience in leadership development, nonprofit development, and management, locally, nationally, and internationally. And she's been an executive coach and facilitator for over 20 years. As a master's certified coach, she is one of only 4% of the coaches worldwide who've achieved that credential. She is also a certified team coach, certified strengths coach, a National Board of Medical Examiners certified health and wellness coach, and holds an MA in intercultural management. Patricia has worked with over 3,500 leaders across sectors and industries, and her background is in executive leadership in the business and nonprofit sectors. She's also raised over $12 million for nonprofits. Patricia, welcome to today's Nonprofit MBA podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, so we're today's topic, which I think is very timely because I think because of all of the technology that is surrounding us, those of us who have snow in the roof, gray hair, know, or I should say experience, know what it was like to build relationships and how important that is. And how the technology that we're all using now has gotten us a little away from that idea of building relationships. So today's podcast is about building relationships to really help your nonprofit. So to start off with Patricia, when we're talking about building relationships, where should we be building relationships, and what part of our organization is that really, really critical?
Great question. Because I always say, try it on yourself first. We really need to start. This might sound corny or something, but we need to start with our relationship with ourselves. And once we build a relationship with ourselves, and I will give you some thoughts about that, then we can build a relationship with our close staff team, then with our board, then with the community, because you really want to build from the inside out. This movie that's out now, Inside Out 2, you really want to start from the inside out. And the way that I do that is based in a lot of research in positive psychology and strengths-based, research, where it's very clear that if we ask people questions about their best experiences, and if this would be one thing to remember from this podcast, is asking people questions about their best experience in the organization, where they felt that they were at their best, as staff, for example, they were at their best. They really understood and felt connected to the purpose of their organization. They were enjoying themselves. They were at the top of their game. They were engaging people. They had high energy. To be able to ask and think about that experience in one's organization connects us to ourselves and to our organization at the same time. So it connects us to our positive feelings, to our values, to our natural abilities, and to why we're there in that organization. So if we start with ourselves and we ask ourselves, it's kind of the why question. It's not just why am I here? It's tell me about a moment where you knew why you were there. Like you really felt it and experienced it and it was powerful for you and you remember that a lot. So when we start there, then the person is connected to themselves. Then they can ask somebody else, tell me, and this is a way you can get to know the people in a different way in the organization. So building relationships really starts with, knowing ourselves, knowing what really makes us tick in that way in the world, what makes us tick in the world. And then asking our staff and our colleagues, basically you're asking what's your why and what makes you tick, but not in that way. You're asking for an account of a personal experience that happened on a certain day at a certain time and how they felt. And I've asked this question to hundreds, probably at this point, actually a couple thousand people. And I should count at some point. So the answers are amazing. They're just absolutely beautiful. Sometimes I'll be so moved and they'll be moved to tears because they'll be talking, about something. So the relationship starts with oneself, then your staff team. Then the staff get really excited. This happens all the time. Staff get really excited. Or if I'm coaching, let's say an executive director, they're really excited. I don't want to do this with my team. And then we want to do this with the board. So then we do this with the board and the board gets together and they actually ask each other that question, the board members. And so then they each have a story and then they share the story with the rest of the board. Like I do this in like a 2 or 3 hour board session where I tell them, here's the question, ask your partner here. And then they each introduce each other by their stories. This builds the most amazing relationship. The whole thing, 2.5 hours. Some people have never heard the story about why the other person on the board that they talk to is even on the board. They don't even know. They don't know much about them because they're at meetings, they don't have a time to learn about each other. So simply doing this, it builds that glue that you need on a board for people to get to know each other better and in a way that shows, what their values are and what they're connected to and what they're like really strong in. This is really helpful for building relationships. And it just naturally builds trust because, you're getting to know somebody around something where they felt really good. And it's all equal. Everybody's equal. Everybody has some kind of an experience where they felt really good about their participation in that organization, or sometimes, I'll ask a question if somebody's new in the organization, I'll ask about the topic, like the cause, like when did you feel, really fantastic? What was an experience in education or what was an experience in the arts or in human services? If they're new on the board and they don't have, a lot of experience with that organization, they certainly have experience with the topic or the cause. So this has led to amazing things. It just sounds so simple and it just really builds. People
Yeah.
are lit up.
I'm going to add a few things to what you've said. I agree with you 100%. I think, one of the best books I had ever read when I was 22 at the time was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And this is a famous book. And it's always listed as one of the top business books you should read. And Dale Carnegie talks about that he, goes to this party and he is talking to this woman and she talked 99% of the time. And he was just asking her questions and open-ended questions. And then later on, the woman said to a friend of his, "Oh, that Dale Carnegie guy, he's the best conversationalist I've ever had." And I really adapted that style in when I go to a party, when I'm trying to get to know somebody. I ask them open-ended questions, and they do feel that that was a good conversation. Now, over time, I have learned to, depending on the situation, to interject to make it conversational. But I would say that's a very influential book in my life that I've read that really changed my behavior. And like you said, opening and understand. I think naturally I tend to be curious about people, so it's very natural for me to ask an open ended question to kind of understand people. I think it's fun. And so I agree with you, and the other thing is, knowing the why of everybody really kind of helps you, either if they're an employee, helps you manage their career. A board member helps you to be able to present things that you want to win them over with. And with a donor, be able to put your organization in a position where they want to give you money because of something that happened in their lives. And so I hate to say, because most people give the idea of sales as a negative, right? I was in professional sales early on in my career, and professional sales are significantly different than what you think of when you go to buy shoes or something like that. Professional sales is about asking questions and learning about someone's needs, and then seeing if you have the right type of service or product for them. And I think that goes for what a nonprofit does as well. Comments about what I've just said, Patricia?
I mean, you totally get it. That's absolutely so accurate. For some reason, there's a misperception that we need to tell. We need to tell the donor. And yes, they do need information, but that's not going to be the first thing we want to do. We really want to ask. We really want to listen. And listening is hard. It's hard. It requires us to manage ourselves, which is another reason why we are starting with ourselves. It's a way we're starting with ourselves, is by acknowledging that we need to listen and practicing listening and practicing when to interact, to the point where, I have people practice their conversations of how they're going to interact with a donor. But yes, absolutely. I totally agree. Listening is very powerful, because then you have information about the person, what they care about. And then from that information, you can find a way to communicate that's in their language, that they understand, that they can relate to, that satisfies them. And you can also know if your organization is not the right place for them. Because, there's this idea of bless and release. If it's not the right thing, you're going to find out really quickly if you listen.
Yeah.
Versus stressing yourself to try to fit into what they want. No, don't do that. There's big examples in the world of organizations trying to be like a pretzel and fit what the donor wants, and that has caused disasters. So I won't mention any that are in my near community right now, but anyway, that happens. So the opposite is listening, understanding, and then interacting in a way that draws the donor closer to the organization. And sales, really understands this. But most nonprofit leaders and most people in nonprofits don't have a sales background. I mean, some do, but most don't. So they don't have that orientation of how you have to really ask powerful questions, open-ended questions, and listen. So I completely agree. And in fact, I have a book. I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I am in the pre-publication stages of a book that combines all the work that I've done over the last 40 years. It's sort of my legacy contribution to the nonprofit world. And it is really a step-by-step guide to how to ask these kinds of questions and use the stories that come out of them in a way that's beneficial for everybody, that creates a win-win-win, which I call a 360 win, for the beneficiaries of the organization, the community, the donor, the nonprofit, and the wider world and the future. like really a big 360 win by going through a process that creates in an organization a story culture where, and I thankfully have had some organizations that have made pretty good progress on this, where everything they think in stories. They think what is our story of the future? what is our story of what our impact? They think that way, and it's really helpful because many donors and human beings, we are wired for narrative. We're absolutely wired that way. We can understand things really quickly through a story that's real, that's about somebody, it's about their experience. So I have this whole process, and the steps in it are called the stories steps, STORIES, and each one is a chapter in my book. So the whole system is called relationship building for prosperity. And prosperity is about the whole community. It's not for one person. It's for everybody.
Yeah, I also find, with myself that over a period of time that I find, and I hate to give a percentage, but if I'm talking more than 50 to 80% of the time in the conversation, then I know to ask an open-ended question at that point. Like if I find that I'm just kind of talking, which is, I feel actually, I've gotten to a point where I feel uncomfortable with that. Like I'd rather ask a question and learn about somebody than for me to kind of regurgitate something I'm thinking about or whatever. Even if I go to say, if I state something, then maybe I'll say, if I find I'm going on too long, I'll be like, so what do you think about that? Because I will catch myself in saying, oh, I'm being too self-centered right now. And so, a lot of the people who are listening to this, they're probably listening to it because they feel that they're not good at relationship building, right? If you're good at relationship building, you're probably not listening to this podcast. Good for you if you are, because you've recognized how important it is. But for those who are say, you know what, I'm just not that good at it. I recognize, if you recognize it too much, or if you recognize that you talk too much, or if you can see people's reaction on their face or stuff like that, you're already ahead of the game, right? But people who are listening to this podcast who are just not good at it, maybe they're not people person, maybe they're introverts. What would you say to those?
Yeah, no, I introverts can be actually very good at asking questions,
Sure.
but it depends on. It's really important for people to participate in their interactions in the way they feel most comfortable. Some people feel more comfortable on a phone call. Some people, because it's a little bit more distant. Some people feel more comfortable in person. And it is true, extroverts sometimes will feel more comfortable in person. I mean, extroverts say that. Introverts will often say, because I work with both extroverts and introverts will say, if you give me a role, I feel more comfortable. So I often will give them a very specific role in like an event that maybe I'm working with a client organization. And I'm going to say, your job is to ask this question to 3 people and listen to them. That's enough of a role. Then they're comfortable. They're out there like, this is my job. Some introverts are very good one-on-one because that's their preference. They prefer to be one-on-one. There's also extroverts that are very good one-on-one, because our personalities are on a continuum, a little bit. So some of us, like I'm an extrovert, and I feel pretty comfortable one-on-one, but I also love groups. I really love groups, being very gregarious. But there are actually gregarious introverts too, who actually love to present or teach, be in a large group, but they also need to then go back and have some of their own personal time. So I never want to put an introvert in a situation where they don't have time to re-energize themselves alone. So sometimes there are really important meetings where there's introverts and extroverts, and they're going to go to a meeting and I'm coaching them, and maybe they have to travel or whatever. And I just strongly recommend that they're careful about their timing and rest time to re-energize. But I have found that introverts can be absolutely amazing, and just as amazing extroverts, introverts. Sometimes extroverts, because we love to talk mostly, we also have to manage ourselves and just not talk as much. And it's kind of a big relief in a lot of ways to just listen.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're listening today and you're like, I know when I was developing my leadership style in my early 30s, learning about myself was really important in leadership, right? Because I was trying to learn what style of leader I wanted to be. I wanted to be what came natural. So I had to take a step back to learn about myself. Have you found any resources that are out there that help people understand what type of person they are, what type of leader they are, so that they can understand, hey, because it's never always clear cut that, hey, I'm an extrovert or, hey, I'm an introvert. It could be situational too. Like what you said, like, oh, well, I'm not saying this about me, but, I'm extroverted when it comes to one-on-one, but when I get into a group, I get shy. Right. So have you found any good resources to help people understand a little bit more about themselves?
Absolutely, because that is the number one thing we do as a coach. As coaches, we are first looking at self-awareness, because self-awareness is the key to every other piece, which are three other pieces. Self-awareness, then you can become able to manage yourself once you're aware. Then once you're able to manage yourself, you're able to become aware of other relationships with other people, and then you're able to manage those. So self-awareness is absolutely the key. There are several assessments that I love to use. I'm certified in the ones that require certification, but I will first tell you about one that doesn't require certification. It's really easy for anybody to use, but I also recommend that they get one coaching session after they do this for themselves. So this one is called new name. It's called Clifton Strengths. And the Gallup organization created it, and they did massive international research to create this assessment, which gives you your 34 themes of your natural talents in order of how you're using them. This is such a great assessment for people to take, and they give you lots of data with it. I'm actually trained in how to what's called debrief this assessment. So I work with a lot of people and teams and all kinds of things so they can understand their own strengths and how other people's strengths relate. So that's one. Wonderful. Doesn't require any certification or anything to do it. And then the Myers-Briggs Type 2, it's called the MBTI Step 2, MBTI Step 2. It does require to have somebody who is certified buy it, give it to you, you take it, and you get debriefed, because we had to go through like 4 days of training on this assessment. And that is all about your natural style, like your preferences, just how you feel most comfortable. It's about you and how you feel most comfortable, but it also, in this one that's called the Step 2, it gives you ideas and suggestions for how to enhance your style, based on the fact that any one of us with a style are going to have blind spots. So it just gives you these really great, very powerful suggestions. And then when you have a debrief session on it, you can think about how to implement them. Like, oh, well, my meeting next week that I'm having, instead of doing what I usually do, I'm going to do this. So, you can look at with a client, I can look at with a client, what am I going to stop doing? What am I going to start doing? So Myers-Briggs is the second one. Then there's a really fabulous emotional intelligence assessment. It's called the EQI 2.0. There's also another one, EQI 360. So the EQI is basically an assessment of your current emotional intelligence. And it's kind of a snapshot. It also requires certification, so you can't just buy it on your own. You have to have a coach, or anybody who's certified could be anybody else, certain qualifications, and then they can, you take it and then they discuss it with you because it's a lot of information, but fantastic assessment. So I've used all of these for like decades. I mean, ever since they were created.
Yeah, the first one I've done the first two. The first one, it used to be called Now Discover Your Strengths, and it was fantastic. And I was lucky enough to do it with a group of 7 people, and so we all did it together, and then we discussed it, and then we all knew each other, so we were all like, "Oh yeah, that's right." That's. But I agree with you. Learning about yourself is a big part of leadership, a big part of knowing how to build relationships. It is interesting. Like when you first talked today about knowing yourself, that you're hitting the nail right on the head. I hadn't really thought of that, but you're right. That in order to get to another level, being able to build relationships, I think you really need to know yourself as well. And by the way, like you said, there's a big negative. There could be a negative between being an extrovert and relationship building, and an advantage of being an introvert, because the extroverts tend to talk a lot, and an introvert can be really good at asking a well thought out question and listening really, really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So don't think, oh, well, I'm not an extrovert, so I can't be good at relationship building, or I am an extrovert and I am really good at relationship building. Well, I wonder. I wonder.
Yeah. I mean,
ask some of your friends, So
absolutely. It's all, we all have blind spots. We all have areas that we shine in. And the idea, when I coach teams and organizations and individuals and leaders, I really take a strengths-based approach, which is very different than people are used to. So I am really looking at, where do you shine? Let's do more of where you shine. Like I had this, and I focus, by the way, a lot on vision, helping an organization. Like one of the first things I'll do is do a whole vision that is based in their strengths as a group, their strengths, and also their aspirations, so that they can realize their aspirations through their strengths. So I usually do this vision. So I did this vision with this organization. And then the executive was kind of new. And, I suggested that one thing he could do is he could go and meet with, we could identify who are the key donors and who are the key board members that he doesn't really know yet. He could meet with each of them one-on-one. He was introverted. He felt, a little more comfortable one-on-one. He could meet with them one-on-one, and he could share the vision of the organization, and he could ask people about themselves and, how they got involved. And he could ask the peak experience question. What is a great experience you have had in our organization? You've been involved for X amount of years. I'm so happy to have a chance to talk with you. Tell me about a moment where you really felt like this organization was having an impact and you wanted to contribute. Well, the first meeting he went on, he did that. He asked the person shared this amazing story. Then he said, here's our vision for the future. It has 2 parts. After he was done, the donor said, could I give you $30,000 for that part and $30,000 for the other one? He's like, sure. Yeah. I mean, he was completely blown away.
Wow.
So earlier you mentioned, something like, having people like offer, right? He offered this, and this happens. This is one of those situations that is the wow, when you really listen and then you share something that relates in language that the person can understand. They just want to be more involved.
Well, it makes complete sense to me. Often donors know why you're going to talk to them, and you don't have to close them. They'll close themselves. If you do a good job of giving them what they want, if you understand their why and you understand why they're there and you listen to them about their history, a lot of times they'll turn the table on you and say, well, tell me a little bit about your organization. And then you can relate your nonprofit to their why, their history. And then it just becomes self-evident if there's a match. And then, why do I know this? Because I've been in situations where a nonprofit executive director has asked me for money. I mean, I'm sorry, it has sat down with me, and the good ones are the ones that don't really even have to ask. I kind of lead it in that direction. I'll lead the call and say, well, listen, tell me a little bit more about what you're doing in this area, because that's what I'm most interested in. So, it's really a nice way uh, to develop relationship and ask for money. You don't really always have to, right?
Yeah. And so I usually recommend that, it seems to be a common phenomenon that in organizations, the people who need to know their donors don't necessarily spend time getting to know their donors, but they have this pressure. You have to raise, $1 million in 12 months. You have to raise 2 million in 12 months, whatever it is, the pressure. I still recommend that they simply go out on get to know you calls. They're not
They
soliciting.
don't ask.
Yeah, they're not even soliciting, and they tell the person, this isn't a solicitation. I want to get to know you. You made this fabulous gift. It had a big impact. I'd like to share my own experience of it. I'd like to hear a little bit more about you. Do you have 25 minutes that we could chat? So that's when those things happen. It's when there's no pressure. It's casual. And then when that occurs over and over, where then you follow up and ask the person if they would come to this event where they would hear about the thing that they mentioned that is really important to them. And then they hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Um, so in an organization where everybody is working on stories and leveraging stories across, then you've got this donor who shared a story of a most important time, a staff person who shared with that donor. Then the donor gets invited somewhere where a beneficiary shares the impact through a story that they tell that is very powerful. Then the donor's like, whoa. Then there's a big event where board members are all, sharing their story in a very distilled kind of way, like 2 sentences, which I help board members take their story and put it into a couple sentences. That's very powerful for them. Mingling, and they're meeting a board member and are meeting a donor, and they're all assigned to meet, this donor, that donor, each board member at an event. They ask, a question, some kind of question. How are you enjoying this event? Any kind of question. Tell me about what brought you to this event, anything. And then they share, I'm on this board because da da da. You're leveraging stories in all these directions, and then following up with the donor after a few of those. We have this project. It's exactly what you mentioned. Can I tell you about it? I'd like to see what involvement you'd like to have, because you move it into that involvement. So that's kind of a process that I help organizations go through. If you think about a wall, think about like a wall, and there's paint on a wall, and the wall ends. So you've got this wall, there's paint. You get to the very end of the wall, the last coat of paint on that wall is the actual ask. All of the paint, everything that's going on the whole wall, if it were like a timeline, is all relationship building. The very last thing that happens is and then it starts over, but the very last thing in that process of building that relationship is the ask, which takes the actual sentence, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Would you consider a gift of X? You've told us, da, da, da. You've told us, blah, 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 blah. We have this project. Would you consider a gift of X? And then zip.
Yeah.
And that doesn't take very long, but the relationship building gets there. Wow.
Yeah. And I think it's self-evident at the end too, as well, when it happens. So, that's kind of all the time we have today. It's a big topic. I think, the purpose of this podcast today is really to make people aware of how important relationship building is, and that you need to spend time on learning how to do it if you're not good at it already. I mean, even if you are good at it already, a lot of times, that book that you mentioned, I guess they changed the name. It used to be called Now Discover Your Strengths. Just for everybody to know, what the Gartner Group studied and they found out is out of 15,000 executives who are very successful, that one of the key things that those successful people did is they focused on the things that they were really good at. And if they weren't good at something, that they didn't like spend a lot of time on it, they kind of either tried to delegate it or find another way for it to get done. But I think when it comes to relationships, it's definitely a learned skill, no matter how good you are on it. And you need to keep working on it. So I'd like to thank so very much Patricia Schwartz for coming on today's podcast. And if you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend, and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. We have so many great guests like Patricia, and this is almost like a nonprofit university. That's why we call it the NBA. But they're really, our guests are excellent, and you can just learn so much from them. And most podcasts are about 35 minutes long. And if you're looking for a line of credit for your nonprofit, please feel free to give us a call or visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. Patricia, if anyone wants to get a hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Oh, thanks for asking. There's two ways. One is via my website, which is Patricia Schwartz, and that's SCHWARTZ. PatriciaSchwartz.com is my website, or Patricia Rachel Schwartz on LinkedIn. And I'd love to connect with you.
Great. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So I just want to remind everybody, I do this after every podcast, that the listeners that are out there, you're all trying to, you're all trying to solve major problems in the world. And I know both Patricia and I thank you for doing that. And we certainly have our share of problems that need to be addressed. And thank you for working on your cause. But I just want to remind you all that you need to take good care of yourself. That comes first, because you're not good to your family, your employees, your cause, anybody, if you don't think about yourself first, because I know there's a lot of unselfish people that are out there. So, what does that mean? We all know what that means. Exercising or meditation or praying or eating right or sleeping right. And every day you should be thinking about yourself first, and then you can help everybody else out, because solving the world's problems really is a marathon. It's not a sprint, and it's so easy to get burnt out. And so just make sure you're taking really good care of yourself. Other than that, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Nonprofit MBA podcast, and have a fantastic day.